The laughter started before the mortar dried. That chimney, leaned left like a drunk against a hitching post, was the kind of thing that made cowboys double over, slap each other's backs, and joke loud enough for even distant neighbors to hear. Folks riding past from Jubilee or Dunlow Ridge slowed their wagons just to gawk at it. It rose crooked out of a half-sunk log house on the far edge of Dry Mile Creek, a slanted stack of soot-black stones twisted like some fool child had stacked them without a level eye, and yet there it stood through snow, wind, and a lightning strike that had missed it by only a foot. It looked like it ought to fall with the next good gust, but it never did. They said his name was Hollis, quiet man, ex-carpenter from the Missouri Bottoms, some said. Others claimed he'd done time in Yuma for burning down a church by accident. Whatever the truth, he kept to himself, built his house alone over the course of 2 bitter seasons, and never came to town unless his flour sack was empty or his hands needed lye soap. But that chimney, Lord, that chimney drew the talk. You see that thing leaning out of his house like a cow halfway through the fence? Denton Fry cackled one night in the saloon, tipping his whiskey and slamming it back. Ain't no wonder he don't have a woman. That chimney's got less spine than he does. Others nodded, laughed, grinned wide with tobacco-dark teeth. It was easier to laugh at a man than understand him, especially a man like Hollis who never laughed back. He'd built the place alone through storms and dry spells, dragging riverstone by hand when his mule got lame, sawing wood from the pine stand 6 miles north, and laying each log with a kind of grim focus that never asked for help or company. His chimney, twisted and set just off true, wasn't a mistake. It was by design. You could see that if you stood close. The stonework ran thick at the base, tapered toward the top, with a peculiar narrowing twist that pulled smoke fast up and out no matter the weather. But no one bothered to ask, and Hollis didn't bother to explain. He kept his voice for work and silence, kept his heat with 1 log a night even when the frost clung silver to his eaves, and kept his secrets like he kept his house, tight, odd, and fireproof. That winter, the winds turned from the east, hard and dry. Snow fell light and quick melted. By January, every pine branch crackled like dry paper underfoot. Chimneys belched black smoke all day as the cold turned mean. Cowboys in Dunlow lit bigger fires. The Fry brothers stuffed their stoves full past midnight. Mrs. Merrick packed 4 logs at a time in hers. They all said Hollis must be freezing in that crooked box of a cabin, burning maybe 1 stick per night, if that, and they kept laughing until the fire came. No one knows where it started, not for sure. Some say it was a dropped lantern at Casker's barn. Others blamed the stovepipe at Albie Gunn's that blew sparks when the wind hit right. Doesn't matter now. What matters is that it tore through Dry Mile like the devil himself had lit the match. It was past midnight when the first scream cut the dark. Flames moved fast, fast, like a trick of the eye, like breath on dry grass. One roof went, then another. Fry's place went up in a roar of pine and smoke, the chimney crumbling as timbers buckled and flames licked skyward. Horses screamed in their stalls. Women and children ran barefoot into snow, blankets wrapped around them like ghosts. Men shouted for pumps, for buckets, for anything, but there was no water to fight it, only frozen wells and panic, except Hollis's place. Folks said later that they could see it through the smoke, still standing, still glowing orange with firelight, but not burning. Not even the moss on the roof had caught. His crooked chimney, black and ugly, spit out smoke calm and clean. No sparks, no flares, no embers launched skyward. It stood like a sentinel while everything else crackled and fell. They found Hollis outside, sleeves rolled, eyes wet with smoke, dragging a wet burlap sack along the brush line to keep the fire from crossing the creek. He didn't say a word, just worked, just kept the fire off his neighbors' root cellars long enough for some of them to grab keepsakes or children or boots. Denton Fry watched his own house collapse with a sound like a dying tree, and in the weeks after, when folks rebuilt with blackened hands and borrowed nails, more than one man walked the 2 miles to Hollis's cabin and asked, quiet, sheepish, how he built it, especially that chimney. Hollis didn't brag. He didn't gloat. He just nodded toward the base of the stonework. Draft pulls sideways, he said. Catches the heat, not the sparks. Then he went back to sanding his window frame. But that wasn't the end of it, because weeks later, when folks tried to copy the chimney, their own stones split. Some collapsed. Others smoked wrong, filling the cabin with soot. Something about the lean, they said. Something in the angle. The Fry brothers tried twice and failed both times. Denton burned his hand on the 3rd try. try. But Hollis's fire never smoked, never faltered. One log, one night, warm as a forge, safe as a prayer, and no one laughed anymore. The cold came back meaner the next month. It rode in on the tail of a black wind, carrying the scent of ash and wet bark, and settled over Dry Mile like a smothering blanket. What hadn't burned was now frozen stiff. The creek ran slow and shallow, thin ice crusting its surface. The wind tore through half-built cabins, through burned-out husks of what had once been homes, and it dragged with it the quiet kind of dread that made a man watch his chimney through the night, wondering if this time the sparks would leap higher. Some said the land was cursed, others blamed the wood, too dry, too brittle, too cracked with age. But deep down, everyone knew it. Wasn't that? It was the heat they were chasing. That greedy, ravenous heat. They wanted what Hollis had. They wanted a fire that burned clean and hot and never threatened to devour the home around it. And they wanted it without understanding it, without paying the price he had. Hollis kept to himself, just like before. He came into town only once every 10 days. Flour, salt, a new chisel once. Folks watched him now with different eyes. Not mocking, not exactly respectful either, but cautious, like he might know something no one else did. Like maybe he wasn't a fool after all, but something harder to define, something they might need. The new sheriff, Lou Herndon, was the first to say it aloud. He came into the general store mid-February, steam rising off his coat, gloves still stiff from the frost, and he said, "Man's chimney survived what God and nature both tried to take. That's worth asking about." He wasn't from around here, had only been sworn in 2 months earlier, after the fire. Tall, square-shouldered, calm like an anvil, but he knew trouble when he saw it, and the way Hollis's cabin had stood while everything else burned. It gnawed at him. So he went out to see it. The wind bit his face the whole walk. There wasn't much sun, just a dull orange scrape against the clouds, and the ground was hard as railroad iron. When he got there, he found Hollis chopping wood with a rhythm that never slowed, never changed, each swing of the axe like a heartbeat in the silence. The chimney puffed steady behind him, smoke curling upward in a tight, quiet thread. No sparks, no flutter, just heat. "You got a minute?" Herndon asked. Hollis didn't stop chopping. "You law? Sheriff, then you already took too many." That gave Herndon pause. He let the silence hang a bit, then said, "Just trying to understand how a man builds a fire that don't turn on him." Hollis drove the axe down one more time, let the log split clean, and finally turned. His eyes were red-rimmed, not from tears but from years. Smoke, wind, maybe memories too. He studied Herndon like a carpenter might study a crooked plank. "It ain't the fire," Hollis said. "It's the draw." "The draw? That lean you all laugh at. It catches the air, pulls the smoke clean, keeps the heat in the stones. You stack it straight, you lose the pull. You get backdraft. You get sparks." Herndon scratched his jaw. "Sounds like you know more than the men who build with blueprints." "I built to survive, not impress." That was the end of it. Hollis turned back to his woodpile. The sheriff watched him another minute, then nodded and left, his boots crunching over frostbitten grass. But the word got out again. This time, it spread quieter, like an underground stream. Folks started trying again. The Barkley twins laid their chimney with a 3-degree lean. Nothing. Mrs. Merrick's brother tried a tighter angle, house filled with smoke. Someone even rode north to fetch a stonemason. But he laughed when he saw Hollis's chimney and said no proper tradesman would build something so lopsided. But one man didn't laugh. Eli Trent. Eli was a cowhand, not a builder. Lanky, dark-haired, with hands calloused from rope and reins, not mortar. He'd lost everything in the fire: cabin, saddle, even the dog that used to sleep under his porch. Since then, he'd been living in the blackened wreck of a stable, sharing body heat with his last surviving horse. One night, just after dusk, he showed up at Hollis's door, didn't knock, just stood there. Hollis opened the door, looked at him, said nothing. Eli finally spoke. "Teach me." Hollis's eyes narrowed. "Not something I teach. I'll work, chop wood, haul stone, dig, you name it." "Why?" Eli looked past him, at the chimney, at the quiet glow pulsing from within the cabin. "Because I'm tired of freezing, and I don't want to burn next time." They stared at each other a long time. Then Hollis stepped aside. From that day on, Eli worked like a man haunted. He followed Hollis into the pines, down the creek beds, up the ridges. They dragged stones in silence, mixed mortar in cold water, cut beams so exact they looked machine-fitted. And when they laid the chimney, Hollis made him do it blindfolded, just by feel. Every angle, every curve, memorized. "You build with your hands, not just your eyes," Hollis said. "That's the mistake most men make." Word got out again. Eli and Hollis working together. A fire that burned clean. A chimney that held secrets. People started watching, but not everyone liked it. Denton Fry, now living in a half-burned wagon behind the saloon, called it witchwork. He spat when Hollis walked by. "Ain't right man building things things that don't follow God's angles. Others muttered the same, that it wasn't natural, that maybe Hollis had made a deal with something worse than fire, that maybe the crooked chimney was a mark of sin. And then one night, a spark did fly, not from Hollis's house, from Denton's temporary shack. The wind shifted again, dry and cruel. Fry had jammed too many sticks into his little stove, trying to keep out the cold. Something snapped. The flame jumped. The roof cloth caught. It might have stopped there, but it didn't. The fire leapt from the wagon to the saloon stables, then to the livery barn. Within minutes, the heart of town was ablaze. People ran again, and once again, Hollis's cabin stood untouched. But this time, it wasn't just the miracle of the chimney. This time, Eli ran back into town with a bucket line, shouting orders like a general. "Pull water from the west well! Douse the rooftops first! Cover the wood piles!" His voice cut through the screams. People listened. They moved faster. They fought smarter. And when the smoke cleared, more than half the town still stood. The difference they'd learned, not just about the chimney, but about the man behind it, and the price he'd paid to build something that didn't burn. Eli said it quietly one night, sitting beside the stove in his newly built cabin. Chimney leaned just so, fire warm and clean. "He lost someone," Eli said. "You can feel it. That fire took something from him once. That's why he builds the way he does. It ain't just heat he's chasing. It's penance." No one asked Hollis to confirm it. Some truths don't need repeating. But more men came to him after that. Not with jokes, not with mockery, with respect, with hands open, with questions. And each time, Hollis said the same thing. "It ain't the chimney that saves you." He'd pause, let them think he meant something else. Then he'd say, "It's how you build it." And the wind would carry the smoke upward, quiet, clean, steady, as if to prove him right. By the time spring tried to break through the ash and ice, Dry Mile was no longer the same place. You could see it in the rooftops, patched not with haste, but care. You could smell it in the air, less of the bitter charcoal stench, more of dry pine, cut proper, stacked right. The wind still bit cold in the mornings, but fewer chimneys belched black soot. The ones that did, they smoked straight up or not at all, most of them leaning ever so slightly, like crooked necks craning towards something only Hollis understood. But what changed most of all wasn't stone or timber. It was the people. The Fry boys stopped drinking and started rebuilding. Denton, limping from burns along his left calf, took up with the blacksmith, earning nails by the hour. The Barkley twins, once too proud to ask for help, swallowed that pride and rebuilt their father's barn beam by beam. Old Mrs. Merrick sold half her sewing stock just to get the right kind of mortar mix shipped in from the county seat. They said she mumbled Hollis's name every time she stirred a new batch. It wasn't reverence, not quite. It was survival, and it was earned. Still, Hollis didn't change. He worked in silence, ate alone, lit his lantern by dusk and doused it by midnight. The only real difference was that Eli came and went freely now, carrying plumb lines and hand-carved wedges, sometimes whistling low tunes as he walked up to the crooked cabin. And sometimes, though not often, Hollis spoke. He didn't preach, didn't teach the way schoolmasters did. But if a man asked the right question, not just about stone, but about loss, about time, about the weight of doing something alone, Hollis would answer. That's how Jed Weller came to him. Jed was a young buck, fresh from the western plains, calloused and angry, still grieving the girl he lost to a fever before the fire took her memory too. He showed up one morning with raw hands and a blueprint copied from an old army manual. "I want to build it the right way," Jed said, voice brittle. "The safe way." Hollis didn't even look at the drawing. He simply handed him a shovel and pointed to the edge of the hill. "You want it safe?" he said. "Dig." Jed blinked. "What? A foundation?" "No, a place to sit when it fails." Jed didn't get it, not then. He scowled but dug anyway. 3 feet, then 5, then deeper, until his back ached and his breath steamed in ragged clouds. Hollis stood nearby, sanding a beam, never correcting, never instructing. By sundown, Jed sat inside the shallow hole, blistered and quiet. "What now?" he asked. Hollis looked up. "Now you know what it feels like to be below something you built." And that was it. The next day, Jed tore up his blueprint and started fresh. That was Hollis's way. Not rules, not diagrams, consequence. But things weren't peaceful for long, because the land around Dry Mile didn't forgive easy. That spring, when the rains finally came, they didn't fall gentle. They came angry, like they'd been held back too long, and now aimed to tear through everything the fire hadn't claimed. Gullies flooded, trails washed out. One of the footbridges near the mill was torn from its posts and sent spinning downstream like a toy. Sheds collapsed under the weight of soaking logs. Chimneys leaned the wrong way and dropped stones like loose teeth, except Hollis's and Eli's and Jed's half-built cabin, rising from the mud with the same stubborn angle in its flue. But not everyone had listened. Not all had asked. At the far end of Dry Mile, near where the tree line broke open into tall grass and the river bent east. A man named Carver Hammond had built a mansion by frontier standards, 2 stories, wide porch, thick beams, even glass windows. He was new, flush with gold rush profits, had come to Dry Mile to civilize it, as he said, and bring in a lumber concern. He'd heard the stories. He'd even stopped by Hollis's place once, walking slow with the air of a man, inspecting a curiosity. But when Hollis said nothing, only nodded once and went back to sharpening his draw knife, Carver smirked and muttered, "So, this is the prophet of ash." He built his house tall and symmetrical, stone chimney rising like a monument, perfectly straight. And then he held a spring gathering, invited every able body in Dry Mile, tables of food, jugs of cider, music from a cranky fiddle player he paid to come down from Ridge Pass. Even Eli went, reluctant but curious. Hollis didn't. No one expected him to. Carver stood on his porch at dusk, drink in hand, and raised a toast. "To rebuilding," he said, voice loud and smooth. "To straight lines, to progress, they say." Eli looked down at his cider then and whispered, "To hubris." The fire came the next day, not from a chimney, from below. The rains had softened the hill. The stones in Carver's foundation shifted just enough to lean the flue a single degree, just enough for a backdraft, just enough for sparks to enter places they never should. By dawn, his house was gone, and this time, there were no survivors, not even Carver. The wind took the smoke east. People said nothing for a week. No jokes, no speculation. Just the sound of hammers and saws and soft prayers mumbled through cracked lips. Then came the meeting. It wasn't formal, it wasn't planned, but word spread and folks gathered one evening outside the blacksmith's shed. Dozens of them, men, women, children, wrapped in shawls, faces taut with fear and questions and something that felt like readiness. They looked to Herndon, the sheriff, but he looked at Hollis, and Hollis didn't move. Finally, Eli stepped forward. "We need to stop pretending this is about chimneys," he said, voice flat. "It's about the way we build everything. We built fast, cheap, proud. We built tall when we should have built warm. We chased heat like it was a prize, not a danger." Someone murmured agreement. Eli went on. "This man," he gestured toward Hollis, "built for the long winter, built knowing the fire could kill him if he made one mistake, and he learned the hard way." Eyes turned again to Hollis, and he spoke, voice low but clear. "Years back," he said, "I built a church, first one I ever laid by hand. Big, beautiful thing, tall flue, straight as a rifle barrel. The day it opened, wind caught the flue wrong. Sparks dropped into the rafters. We were singing when it caught. 17 dead." Silence swallowed the crowd. "I swore I'd never build anything again unless it bent with the wind," Hollis said. "Never again would I trust a straight line." He turned and walked away, but no one forgot. In the days that followed, something strange happened. People began changing their plans. They tore down new chimneys and rebuilt them slightly off. They adjusted angles, they sought wind patterns, they learned about the draft, about stone thickness, about the heat curve. They stopped chasing elegance and started chasing endurance. And slowly, Dry Mile stopped burning. It wasn't magic, it was humility and a crooked chimney that stood against fire, wind, and pride. But something else was coming, something colder. The wind shifted one night in late spring, came down from the north with a bite that didn't belong to the season. Eli stood outside, watching the sky, sensing something more than weather. And inside his cabin, Hollis adjusted the flue by half an inch, checked the mortar, and said quietly to no one, "It's not over yet, because when the cold comes wrong in the springtime, it doesn't bring frost, it brings something worse." The cold rolled in quiet, not with thunder, not with storm clouds or sleet, but with a stillness that turned your breath shallow and made animals prick their ears and whine low in their throats. By early April, the mornings felt more like late January. The usual thaw never came. Sap ran sluggish in the trees. Creek ice cracked sharp and didn't melt. The winds that typically howled through the timber went silent, replaced by a thick, uncanny hush, like the whole world held its breath. They called it the still cold. No one had a better name for it, because it didn't behave like any cold they knew. The temperature dropped fast each evening, but never rose in the day. Frost climbed upward along walls, curling under eaves. Breath hung in the air like smoke from a low fire, slow to fade. Even inside cabins, fires had to be fed twice as often, and still folks felt the chill sink in like damp cloth. Children woke crying with noses red and feet purple. Horses refused to drink from troughs layered with glassy ice. Milk turned sour on shelves near the wall. And the draft, something every man in Dry Mile had learned to respect, shifted into something unpredictable. Even Hollis noticed it. He stood out front of his crooked cabin one morning, mug of bitter chicory in his hand, watching the chimney puff. The lean was still true. The smoke still drew up clean, but it twisted near the top. Strange, like something invisible had caught it and bent it sideways. That had never happened before, not once in 6 winters. He stepped inside inside and checked the hearth. The fire burned fine, but the warmth didn't cling to the walls the way it used to. It radiated straight up, fled too fast. The stones stayed warm, but not hot. Something was wrong. 2 hours later, Eli came knocking. He didn't bother with greetings, just said, "Jed Weller's stove exploded?" Hollis blinked. "How?" "Backdraft. He said he saw smoke come down the flue. Said it turned black and dropped on him like oil. Fire hit the floorboard. He got out with burns. Cabin's gone." Hollis set down his mug and pulled on his coat. They walked to Jed's together. Nothing left but stone and a half-melted horseshoe near the edge. Jed sat nearby, face wrapped in cloth, shivering under a quilt, rocking slightly, eyes not quite seeing. His boots were gone, burned off or left behind in the panic. "I did it like you said," Jed croaked. "I copied everything." "You copied the lean?" Hollis asked. "Every angle. You used the same stone? Same quarry? You test the draw?" Jed hesitated. I thought I didn't need to." Hollis closed his eyes. That was the mistake. It wasn't enough to build like someone else. You had to understand why. By sundown, 4 more men had come to Hollis's cabin with tales of strange drafts. Fires that burned sideways, smoke that refused to rise. The still cold was doing something to the air. Maybe it was pressure. Maybe it was something deeper, older. Whatever it was, the rules had shifted, and no one had told the fires. Hollis stood with Eli in front of his hearth late that night, firelight playing over their faces. He took a stick, held it in the smoke column above the flames. It should have curled up, drawn fast into the flue, but it wavered, danced, like something fought to push it back down. "This chimney was made for normal winters," Hollis said quietly. "This ain't normal." "What do we do?" Eli asked. Hollis stared into the flame. "We change the angle. But just a hair. 2 degrees more lean. It'll shift the pressure inside. Pull harder against the cold. The draw'll fight back. And the others? They'll need to do the same." "Will they?" Hollis didn't answer, because the answer was no. Most wouldn't. Most would patch and hope, adjust furniture, feed more wood, pray harder, and some would pay the price, but some listened. Eli and Hollis worked all night pulling stones. They pulled half the chimney apart and reset it with the new angle, working in silence, breath pluming like smoke, hands numbed and red by dawn. The next morning the draft pulled clean. No swirl, no pushback. It worked. They passed the word. A few men listened. Sheriff Herndon was the first. He brought his sons and tore down his own chimney with bare hands, more to be damned. 2 others followed, then 5 more. But for everyone who adjusted, 2 didn't, and the fires came again. Not fast, not like before, not in a great blaze, but quietly, insidiously. A stovepipe would crack, a flue would puff black, then a curtain would smolder, a rafter beam would glow red from inside. And when the fire came, it came in silence. No roar, just heat and collapse. People woke too late, and this time it took the Merrick boy, 9 years old, sleeping near the hearth. Mother survived with burns, but not the boy. The funeral happened in wind that stung like punishment. They buried him in half-frozen ground, shovels ringing off frost below the loam. Hollis stood back, hat low, arms crossed. Eli stood beside him, jaw clenched. Afterward, Mrs. Merrick walked up to him, face blistered, shawl frayed and wind-whipped. "I didn't listen," she said. "I thought I could manage. I thought I was careful." Hollis didn't offer comfort. He offered truth. "We always think the fire answers to us," he said. "It doesn't." And then he walked away. That night someone tried to tear down his chimney. He heard the scrape at midnight. He opened the door to find 2 men with crowbars at the base of his flue. Drunk, angry. "You curse this town," one slurred. "You brought the fire. You build wrong on purpose," the other said. "So we'd fail." Hollis didn't argue. He just grabbed a shovel, swung once. 1 man dropped, the other fled. By morning, word had spread. The sheriff came, found the man with a broken collarbone moaning by the woodpile. But he didn't arrest Hollis. He just nodded once and said, "Should have known better." Because even now, even after all they'd seen, some men couldn't let go of pride. But the town was changing, fast. By week's end, half the homes had rebuilt or adjusted their chimneys. Hollis walked house to house with Eli, inspecting angles, adjusting draw plates, shifting stones by hand. He said little, just pointed, nodded or frowned. It was enough. The fires slowed, the smoke cleared, and then the strangest thing happened. One morning the still cold broke. The sun rose yellow, not gold, not orange, but a sharp, clear yellow that hadn't touched dry mile in months. The frost melted by noon. Birds returned to the trees. Water ran in the creek, fast and loud. The air no longer pressed down. It felt like breathing for the first time. People stepped outside their cabins, dazed. Some wept, others just sat in the mud, letting the warmth soak through their coats. And Hollis, he didn't come out. Eli knocked on the door at dusk. No answer. He went inside. Hollis was by the hearth, sitting still, coat wrapped tight. The fire had gone out. Eli crossed the room fast. Hollis's skin was cold, not dead, but close. He stirred when Eli touched him. Didn't light it, he whispered. Wanted to see if I'd built it strong enough to hold warmth without flame. Eli crouched, eyes wide. You could have frozen, Hollis smiled, weak. No, I just needed to know. I could let the fire go. Eli lit the hearth again, fast and clean. The chimney drew right. The warmth returned. But something in Hollis had shifted, like the burden had lessened. Like maybe, for the first time, he wasn't the only one carrying the weight. By early May, the crocuses began pushing up through the soot. You could walk down Dry Mile and smell the thaw, not just the melting ground, but the smoke-washed timbers drying out, the last of the frost boiling off of iron latches, the mold lifting off forgotten porch steps and drifting away in the sun. No one said the worst was over, not out loud, not with the memory of little Merrick in the ground, and half a dozen chimneys still collapsed behind homes that never saw the sun through winter. But life resumed, even laughter, a cautious kind to be sure, more like breath than joy. Men still watched their stoves when they lit them, still kept water buckets near the hearth, still leaned out windows in the early morning to check the angle of the rising smoke. But something had passed through the town, fire, ice, pride, and now what was left felt tempered, as if the town itself had been reshaped, not destroyed. That's when the letter arrived. It came by stage. A red envelope, formal, sealed with tar, addressed not to a person but to a town. Dry Mile, care of Postmaster Hammond. No one remembered any Postmaster Hammond, but the name wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the seal. 3 black towers, the emblem of the Eastern Coal and Flame Company. Sheriff Herndon took the envelope and opened it in the general store, under the watchful gaze of half the town. The letter inside was polite, measured, and filled with words like partnership, progress, and fuel modernization. It spoke of establishing a regional office in Dry Mile, complete with metal chimneys, coal-fed stoves, and combustion engine heaters, modern, marvels imported from Chicago and beyond. They want to advance us, Herndon muttered. They want to undo everything we just learned, Eli said quietly. And then the last line of the letter. We look forward to showing your community that fire, when mastered by industry, need no longer be feared. No one spoke for a long time. When the whisper of wagon wheels on dirt finally broke the silence, all heads turned. And there they were, 4 covered wagons, black tarps, iron-rimmed wheels, glinting brass fittings, and men in tall brown coats sitting the reins. No town name stenciled on the sides, no dust, just clean steel bolts and silent stairs. Coal and Flame had arrived. They made camp at the edge of town, down by the old sawmill ruins where the fire never reached. Their foreman, a man named Rassel, set up a canvas tent and invited the town leaders for a demonstration. We understand your reluctance, he said, but these aren't your grandfather's stoves. Eli didn't go. Hollis didn't even leave his cabin. But Herndon did. So did 3 ranchers, 2 shopkeepers, and Mrs. Merrick, still wearing the scars across her cheeks. What they saw unnerved them. The stove Rassel presented was all steel and rivets, shaped like a potbelly, but longer, heavier, with a self-feeding chute and a pressure gauge built into the side. He lit it with a match, and it roared instantly to life, hissing and ticking like a kettle. The heat was immediate, powerful, and, for now, controlled. Temperature can be adjusted with this valve, Rassel explained. Smoke is filtered through this pipe, passed through 3 cooling chambers, and vented without soot. Cleaner, faster, smarter. And louder, one rancher muttered. But Mrs. Merrick said nothing, just stared at the roaring heart of the machine, her hands twitching at her sides. By week's end, 6 homes had agreed to install the new stoves, then 10, then 18. By month's end, Coal and Flame stoves burned in half the homes in Dry Mile. The other half, they kept their chimneys crooked. Eli watched the split grow with a tight jaw. He'd worked with many of these folks, laid their stone himself, adjusted their angles, fixed their draft plates. Now they looked at him with half-hearted apologies and talked about convenience. Just tired of splitting logs, one man said. This thing eats coal like a dream. It heats the place in minutes, said another. And no smoke, none at all. But not all was well. 3 weeks in, Mrs. Merrick came to Eli's cabin, pale and shaking. It talks, she whispered. What? The stove. When it's cooling down, it makes a noise, not creaking, not ticking. It's like breath, like it exhales. Eli said nothing, but the next night he crept out to her place and crouched outside the wall. And sure enough, just after midnight, when the stove wound down, he heard it, a low, wet exhale, not mechanical, not wind, something alive. And then the air near the flue changed, just for a moment, cold, dense, like the still cold had returned, just for a breath. The next morning, Eli went straight to Hollis's cabin. He didn't knock, just barged in, face drawn, hands red from the night chill. They brought something we don't understand. Hollis didn't look up from the stone he was grinding. I told you, we never control the fire. We only negotiate with it. These machines, they don't negotiate. Now Hollis did look up, and the look in his eye said he already knew. They think metal makes them safe, he said, but they forgot what the fire listens to. What does it listen to? Balance, air, pressure, and silence. What happens when that's gone? Hollis set down the stone. It finds new ways to be heard, and then the stoves began exploding, not all at once, one by one. Each failure different. One burst its side plate, another blew back smoke so dense it blinded a boy for life. A third sucked in too much coal too fast and belched fire straight through the flue, igniting a roof beam in seconds. Each time coal and flame men patched it, replaced valves, added reinforcements. But the problem wasn't mechanical, it was the air. These machines didn't lean, they didn't breathe. They forced heat into space that hadn't agreed to receive it. They pushed, and the town pushed back. Eli and Herndon stood in the ashes of the Baxter place, now just iron stove parts and cracked beams. When the sheriff finally said it aloud, "They're gonna kill us all." But the town was caught in between. Some homes swore by the new stoves. Others whispered of waking up gasping, air too thick. One child claimed the stove growled at night. Then came the fire in the church. New stove, no stonework, straight pipe, no survivors. Even the bell tower collapsed. That night, someone smashed 3 of Coal and Flame's wagons. Russell left town the next morning, 2 men wounded, 1 limping. But they left the stoves behind, and now Dry Mile stood divided. 2 halves, 2 kinds of heat, one forced, one crooked. And as summer crept near, and winds grew dry again, and brush thickened under the eaves of too many homes, Hollis sat beside his chimney, whetstone in hand, and whispered to Eli, "The fire's coming again. Not out there, not by accident. It's in the house now." The last fire began on a windless night. Not a leaf stirred, no dust on the road, no creak of shutters or howl from the ridge. It was the kind of silence that towns remember. Dead silence, wide and tight as stretched canvas. You could hear the ticking of the old mill wheel, even though it hadn't turned in months. You could hear the faint shift of chimney smoke curling into the stars. And beneath all that, if you'd dared step outside, you might have heard the first breath of something unnatural slipping from flue to flue in the eastern half of town. That night, 11 homes burned, not from one spark, not from wind or dry brush or an unattended stove, from the stoves themselves. Witnesses, those who survived, described the same thing. A hiss, a soft intake of air, and then a blinding roar. No warning, no visible cause. The metal stoves simply woke up. Sheriff Herndon, pulling 2 children from a blazing porch, later said it was like watching iron come alive. It bent from the inside, he told Eli, his hands blistered. The heat came from nowhere, from inside the frame. The fire wanted out. By dawn, every Coal and Flame stove in Dry Mile had either ruptured, collapsed, or been thrown out into the road. The company never came back. Their wagons vanished before the sun rose, tracks veering east toward God knows where. They left no apology, no explanation, no paper trail, just twisted scrap and warped pipe and families burying their dead. It would have broken the town again, maybe for good, if not for what happened next. Hollis, who'd once spoken barely a word to most folks, who'd built alone, grieved alone, survived alone, walked into the town square at noon, coat open, boots dusted, soot still smeared across his brow. He climbed the steps of the church foundation, what little remained, and stood atop the stone threshold. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "When fire comes," he said, "it speaks, not with sound, with signs, with smoke that won't rise, with warmth that flees, with cracks in the brick that weren't there yesterday. It doesn't come all at once. It warns you. It gives you a chance." The townspeople stood, some wrapped in soot-black blankets, some barefoot, some still bleeding, but they listened. "You all laughed when my chimney leaned, said it looked like a drunk's spine, said I was a fool, but it stood, not because it was pretty, because it respected the fire." He turned slowly, gaze sweeping over them. "The fire's never your friend, but if you listen, it'll keep you alive." And then he stepped down. No applause, no cheers, just heads bowed, a silence full of understanding. What followed in the weeks after wasn't rebuilding. It was transformation. Every chimney in Dry Mile, without exception, was torn down and rebuilt by hand, not just by men, women, children, old folks. Everyone lifted stone. Everyone laid mortar. They didn't copy Hollis's lean. They stood beside him, learned it, felt it in their own hands, and then adjusted it for their homes, their wins, their needs. The crooked chimney became a symbol, not of mockery, but of reverence, and it spread. Riders who passed through took the story with them. Soon, cabins north of Ridge Pass leaned their flues. Outposts near Salt River twisted their stone stacks. By winter, small towns across the territory had adopted what they started calling dry mile tilt. No one knew the name of the angle, but they all remembered who taught it. Hollis never sought credit. He never put his name to a design or demanded recognition. He just stayed in his cabin, warm through every cold night, one log at a time. But the story kept growing. One night, Eli returned from a supply run up north and brought a strange parcel, a book, handmade, no author, just a cover that read, "How to Build Against the Fire." Inside, page after page of hand-sketched chimney diagrams, airflow charts, notations about draft, stone absorption, stove placement, ash flow, all drawn with a familiar, meticulous hand. At the back, a single sentence. If you build straight, you serve yourself. If you build crooked, you serve your children. Eli left the book on Hollis's porch. He never saw it again. But weeks later, when a young couple from Jubilee knocked on Hollis's door, husband hat in hand, wife 6 months pregnant, they said he answered with a quiet smile and motioned them inside. "I heard you build for the long winters," the man said. Hollis poured them chicory, sat, nodded. "We want to learn." He looked at the woman, looked at the swell of her belly. "You willing to dig your own stone?" "Yes." "You willing to fail 3 times before you get it right?" "Yes." "You willing to live close to your heat, not just near it?" "Yes." He nodded once more. "Then let's build something that doesn't kill you." And that's how it began again. Not with fire, with people. Word spread, but quietly. No companies, no brands, just hands passing knowledge, just crooked chimneys rising out of hillsides, each different, each drawn with care, each made to bend, to listen, to breathe. Years passed. Children grew, and somewhere near the edge of what once was called Dry Mile, a visitor passing through on a cold autumn evening noticed something strange. Not one chimney in town stood straight. Not one roof belched black smoke. Not one window glowed too hot or too dim. And when he asked the old man sitting outside the store why that was, the man just smiled, pointed toward the ridge and said, "Because once, a long time ago, we made fun of a man's crooked chimney, and then our homes went up in smoke." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing in the dusk. But not his, never his.